So what I'd like to talk about today is how to figure out how to trust the output that we get from AI systems. So specifically, I want to ask a question. What is our current problem with trusting AI results? Like, why don't we trust them? I think it comes down to the quality of the results and the lack of visibility into the process. I think these are kind of the two main problems that lead to this. So if we take the first one, I think there's a lot of variation there because the quality of AI is getting pretty good and we're able to trust results more. Other times AIs are still hallucinating. I would say the trend is improving towards quality and more dependable results. So I think the quality issue is actually going down. I would say the transparency issue is actually much bigger because the problem is that AI is a black box and a lot of people think of it as a black box, and we don't really trust things when we don't understand how they work. So I think this is actually what we tell ourselves, but we seem to conveniently forget how opaque humans actually are, right? Like if you give somebody a security assessment, you don't necessarily, you can't really track how they're figuring out where to look, what to look for. It's all just kind of coming to them from intuition. And a lot of times people can't really explain where that's coming from or why they, when they did the same assessments like 6 months ago, they had different results as today, even if the app was the same. So humans are very opaque, right? I mean, if you ask somebody in a pipeline of a business process, like why does this keep happening? Why does this problem keep happening? We put out the document, we're supposed to have a very official way of doing this, and yet we still keep having mistakes. It's because as you move through these stages, each person is kind of making it up as they go along. Maybe they forgot to look at the document. Maybe they misread the document. Maybe they looked in the wrong part of the document. There's so much variation. So I think people think humans are a lot more dependable than they are. But I think ultimately we're more of a black box than we would like to admit. So one example of this is similar to autonomous cars, actually. So we don't really trust AI results. We also don't really trust AI to drive us around yet. At least that's been my anecdata sort of experience. And what's interesting about this is that when you talk to bicyclists, or at least a number of surveys have looked at this, they're actually much happier to be riding their bike next to a Waymo than next to a human driver, because a human driver is not going to be, or a Waymo is not going to be looking at TikTok, where a lot of human drivers will be while they're driving. So I think the best way to think about AI in the context of business is actually to imagine business as a series of intelligence tasks. So it's like, it's an intelligence task, but it's stacked with another intelligence task, and they're all built into this pipeline. So let's say you work at an insurance company and you have to basically gather evidence, you have to look at the evidence, and then at the very end, you're making a decision, are we going to pay this policy or not? So that's an example of a sequence of intelligence tasks. So here's another flow for a different business. This is like, I call these pipelines, flow pipelines, intelligence task pipelines. And I think before too long, this is how we're going to look at business. We're going to look at business as a series of these, and AI is definitely going to look at business as a series of these. So I think the way that, excuse me, the way that AI starts to affect business going forward is it's going to start replacing the function of a human performing these various intelligence tasks, right? So like analyze mole or write a report, that's what gets replaced, right? And eventually it replaces the whole pipeline. So taking the image, analyzing the pipeline, looking at the mole, deciding if it was dangerous, deciding if there was a change from the previous picture to this picture, that type of thing. Or in this case, deciding how bad it is or whatever. So let's look at another example in the security space because we're talking about security here. So let's take this piece of code. So this piece of code has just been submitted to go into production. And now we have to review it. We're the security team, right? We have to determine pass or fail for this being allowed into production. And this is a Flask app, and it sets up a database. It does a bunch of stuff with customer data. So what we're ultimately trying to get to is if it says no, or if it says yes, especially if it says yes, it's safe to go into production. We need to know, do we actually trust this result? And why should we trust the result? Right? What criteria do we have that gives us confidence? So what I believe the answer is to have multiple different analysis pieces that get performed on a given AI output. And then you evaluate all of those together. So rather than business pipelines, these are validation pipelines. So what I did was take this code and hit it with 3 different systems. So there's a code review. There's an open source project by Sneak. I did an AI one with Llama. And we also have a secure code policy, okay, which is text. And all of those are going to run against the code. So first we did the open source Sneak test against the app. And we sent those results into the Sneak result. And that produced a JSON. And this is what the JSON looks like. Then we looked at it with AI, and this is what the AI result looks like. Again, it's a JSON output. And then here is the security policy that we used to look at. And this is the most basic security policy you will ever see. Obviously, you can make one way better. But we're just going to say, as a company policy, we don't want any SQL injections. These are things that are not allowed in any of our code to go to production. So now we have 3 different results using 3 different techniques. And here's for the cool part. Okay, the cool part here is this 4th piece. This 4th piece is the AI evaluator that looks at the results of the previous evaluations. Okay, so this is actually the piece that's doing this. It's basically looking at all these different outputs and then describes the assessment process. So look at this. This is the output. It gave me a visual, because this is what I asked it to over here, gave me a visual of the entire process. This outputted into this chart here, but look at the summary. The summary is fantastic. So it says multiple independent scans performed. Okay, all these different scans were performed. Each one used different approaches. Comprehensive coverage because it did all these 3 different things. Consistent results across all the scans. This is explainability. This is transparency. And the conclusion is fail. It is not ready for production. And that graph that it made actually produced this output, which you could give to like an auditor or somebody who just needs confidence in what you're building. So imagine like military decisions or health decisions or picking a restaurant, right? Some things matter more than others, so we will need more validation steps for some things versus others, up to and including like you might need a human in the loop for the last piece. So if I'm right, the way we're going to end up trusting AI and its results is by having AI run multiple disparate types of tests and then explain each test to us, the methodology that was used for the test, and why it believes that we should actually trust the result. Thanks for your time.